let's talk about Mortal Sin. I'll ask and answer two simple questions by the end of this preview, and that is, what is Mortal Sin and should you buy it? Mortal Sin is a hyper-stylized dungeon crawler slash roguelite RPG, I guess you could call it, because you do have different builds and classes when you get in. We'll get to all of that later, of course, made by one guy called Nikola Todorovic. If you look at his Steam page, he doesn't have any other games in there, so you would probably expect a lot of compromises, but I'm really happy to report that this game feels like a full-fledged game by a small indie studio. The graphics look really good because they are stylized, and the game is fleshed out. It feels really good to play. Of course, if you went down to crouch and take a look at every single pixel, you would probably see that the graphical fidelity isn't photorealistic or anything like that. But we all know that for indie games, what is important is style and not the photorealism of what the game looks like. And as you can see, the game looks really good. It has really strong art direction, and that puts it up there with some of the nicest looking games, if you ask me. At least it is an aesthetic that I really like. And before we get into the meaty stuff, let me show you the options menu. There are quite a few options actually that you can tweak. Most importantly, I want to say that you can change the FOV, so if you get sick from low FOV games, you can easily crank that up. The controls are also good, but you cannot double bind any of the controls, which would be nice. You also see separate audio sliders, and in the visuals you can't really see anything that you don't expect, but I can say that the game performs really well on my 3080 as it should. You'll be able to see FPS during this video. With all of that out of the way, let's dive into the game. As you can see, I don't have all the classes yet, as this is a first impression series, but I did unlock Reaper later in the game, as you could see in my footage before, and Reaper confirmed to me that the classes are the best thing about this game and probably the worst thing about this game. Usually in roguelikes, whenever you select a class, there are no drastic differences in how they play. Well, most of the time, right? But most of them utilize the same game mechanics, and they also utilize similar weapons that you used in different styles. However, this game is quite different from that. You can see that the Struggler, for example, will utilize long swords and spears and stuff like that, and you will have access to your full kit, every single button that you have. But when you move to the Mage, you can see that you don't have your power attack, instead you have spells. And when you combine that with how the weapons work, you are basically playing a completely different game. Then you would move on to the Monk, who plays unarmed, which means that you focus your builds completely on different stuff. Berserker also has game-changing things, and then so on and so forth. Every class is basically like playing a different game, which is a good thing and should be a great thing. But the reason I am also calling it a weakness is that there is way less build diversity within the classes, even though there is a lot of build diversity in the game. So it is a compromise that I'm sure that the developer made consciously, and I think that I'm a fan of it, but I would like to be able to make a lot of different builds with the same class, which I possibly can. This is a first impression, it's not a full review, but this is what I've been struggling at the beginning. The other, and maybe the bigger issue that this way of making the classes work creates, is that pacing for me was honestly terrible, and this might be the biggest issue. I ended up really loving the game, and I'm gonna play it until I beat it and until I unlock everything, that is for sure. But at the start, I really didn't want to play this game. I was considering refunding it because none of the starting classes really appealed to me, so I thought that the game just wasn't for me. But what did make me want to continue playing the game, at least until I unlocked the Berserker, was the Berserker class, because I saw that they were playing with a huge two-handed sword, and I was like, alright, if I don't like this class, I'm not gonna like anything else. And lo and behold, playing the Berserker is awesome. As you can see on the screen, they are kind of overpowered, but they can't really regen their health, because this game lets you regen the health through gathering red orbs that the enemies and the destroyed objects drop. But when you are the Berserker, you don't get any of those orbs except at the start of the level and in between levels, so you get punished for losing health way more, and it creates a really interesting game loop, which means that when you're playing the Berserker, you're kind of playing a whole different game than if you were playing something else. And that is why this is my favorite and my least favorite feature in the game. Once you get into the classes, they are really fun to play. They are all so different, but it can make you bounce off the game way too early unless you experience a class that you really like, because after Berserker, I figured out that I really like the Reaper as well, and then I also had a really good run with the Monk class, where I got the Guillotine Boots and the Roundhouse Kick, which basically means that you can spin your legs around and decapitate foes around you, which is really, really fun to do. So if I were to suggest something to the developer, it would be to let people select one of 3 classes at the beginning. Let's say that you start with the Straggler, and then you can select which one of the next 3 you wanna unlock first, so that people who think that they would prefer the playstyle of the Berserker could enjoy the game a bit quicker and not bounce off the game because they just didn't find a class that really resonates with them yet. But now let's speak about some good things, and the good thing is the combat. Oh god, the combat. There is nothing more satisfying than a well-made melee combat system. It is like gamer crack, and let me tell you that this game is pretty much gamer crack. Not only does it have really, really good combat, it also lets you get to some ridiculous power levels and enables you to have different power fantasies depending on which class you took. So for example, if you take the Reaper, you can feel like you're playing Diablo, because just look at this footage, what is going on. Once I have experienced that, all of my criticisms of the game kind of faded away. So I think if the developer kind of irons this out across early access, because this is just the first patch, the first release, I think that this game will be something special. I fully intend to finish the whole game and also then play it again once it releases and possibly do a full review. Before we close it out, I will give you a list of pros and cons. And the great thing about this game is that the cons are things that are so easily fixable, and the core game is so good that I wouldn't have any issues actually recommending this game to anybody at the moment. Now, again, this is first impressions, this is not a review, so I don't know what the end game is like, I don't know how much replayability there is once you finish the game for the first time, but as far as first impressions go, after about 3.5 hours, this game is absolutely something that I will keep my eye on and I will continue playing. Let's start with the cons, because I want to leave a good taste in your mouth of this game. So I will start with the cons, and the cons, as I said, very small things. First thing being the pacing that I talked about earlier in the video. I really wish that I could just pick which class I want to unlock first from the first 3 classes. So instead of a mage and a monk, I could get to the Berserker right away. Or if I wanted to play an unarmed class, so that I can start with the monk instead of a mage. Second con, and this I'm saying as a dyslexic person, I cannot read most of the text in this game. I will put it up on screen. It is really hard and really straining for me to read. So having an option with a dyslexic font, or even changing the main font, because I'm not sure if people who are not dyslexic can read this, would probably be a good idea, but at least an option to have it there would be nice. One thing I feel is a con of the combat system is that when you have a lot of enemies, you kind of have to rely on perfect parries, or else you get overcrowded way too easily. Now, I don't mind having to use the parry, of course, it's a huge game mechanic, but I don't like that it feels like it's the only option once you get swarmed, but I assume that maybe with some other classes that I didn't get to play yet, you probably have different ways of dealing with huge crowds, but the 3 ones that I played so far, I didn't find any other ways except for parrying, but that is fine, that is a minor complaint. Next thing is, I would really like to have an indicator of when my items are gonna break, because the items break in this game while you use them, so you don't have anything for the whole run, and sometimes in the middle of a fight, I can't see the bottom right of my screen, especially because I use a 27-inch monitor, so having an option to have a flashing icon in the middle of the screen when my items are about to break, or having an option to set potions to automatically use when something is about to break would be really nice and helpful. And finally, the last con would be, and this might just be an issue on my computer, though I don't think that it is the loading times. Whenever I click new game after a run ends, or whenever I enter the game for the first time, the game takes about a minute to load into the world, to load into the main area, but once I'm in the dungeons, once the run starts, there are no loading times at all, so it's not too much of an issue, but I think that it might be worth pointing out. Besides that, performance on my 3080 is top notch. With that out of the way, let us talk about the things that this game does well, because it does a lot well, and it does a lot really well. Generally, you're gonna judge the game based on what the games in its genre are supposed to excel at, so you will never judge how gunplay feels in a game that you don't get to shoot a lot of guns. But for a roguelike, the most important thing to get right is the core gameplay experience, the build variety, and feeling like every single run is a new adventure, and let me tell you, this game does exactly that. The combat feels amazing, the gameplay loop kinda keeps everything varied. I will not spoil how exactly the structure of the game works, but every run can feel fresh and new. You also have optional risks, so you constantly get to weigh risk versus reward, and when you combine it with everything else that we've talked about in this section, it is all that you need for a roguelike to be really, really enjoyable to play. There is no better recommendation that I can give except, well, after this video is done uploading, I'm gonna go back and continue playing it. And if you would like to pick this game up, you can pick it up on Steam in early access for about 16 euros. At the moment, it's on a 20% launch sale for a while, link in the description. And if you have enjoyed the video, please decapitate the like button and kick the teeth in on the subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.